And we have Greg Johnson with us also. We'll do some formal introductions here in just one moment. But we appreciate you all joining the webinar today on breaking down record keeper vendor searches. We're going to go through the basics. We're going to provide some benefits and also discuss some best practices right now in this environment where a lot of you all may be considering searches or have went through a search. We want to share some of the information and detail that we've seen during this process. A few housekeeping details before we get started. We do have a Q&A functionality set up within the program. We'll be attempting to monitor that while we're doing the webinar. If you have a question during that time, please post that there in the chat. We'll attempt to get you an answer in real time. And if it's something we can't answer right now, we'll definitely reach back out to you, gather your information to make sure that we can share that back. This presentation will also be recorded. So you may have just heard that bell go off that this presentation is being recorded. We'll have it available once the presentation is over. And if you have any additional details or needs after that, we can share that along with the recorded presentation. So take a pause there and we'll jump right into our first slide for some formal introductions. So again, Breon Rollins, a consultant. I'm actually based in Houston, Texas. Started my career in higher education on the human resources side. Worked at a number of universities and have been here at Multnomah Group for going on 3 years now. So I'll turn it over to my co-presenter today. And again, this will be more of a conversation that Greg and I have to share information. So Greg, I'll turn it over to you for your introduction.
Thanks, Breon. Yeah, Greg Johnson. I'm a senior consultant here at Multnomah Group. Been in the industry for over 25 years. When we were deciding who would be presenting the RFP discussion today, we sort of landed on myself and Breon because of, I think, some of our unique history. Breon has certainly, well, both of us have managed RFPs on behalf of Multnomah Group, but Breon has had the opportunity to sit on the employer side of the table during an RFP process, and I've had the opportunity to sit on the side of the record keeper going through an RFP process. And so I think between the two of us, we really had the opportunity to experience what it means to go through the process, sitting in different seats and wearing different hats. So hopefully we can provide some unique perspectives from our combined backgrounds.
Oh, definitely. And to add a little more color to that, one of my responsibilities within the firm is also serve as our search consultant. So the plans that we work with that may go out to search or request for a bid, oftentimes I will work alongside a consultant partner and an analyst partner to make sure that we take that search from the beginning all the way to the selection phase. So a lot of experience as it relates to what happens on the front end and the back end of the search that Greg and I should hopefully be able to get you all some perspective today. So let's just go over what the agenda, and again, this will be more of a conversation that Greg and I will have, somewhat going back and forth, but of course, feel free to chime in on the Q&A at any time. The first thing we'll attempt to answer will be, why is this important? What's the reason behind we should be just discussing the basics or what a search function will look like? A lot of us do fee benchmarking, or we look at benchmarking plans against other plans that are similar to the plan that we have. Is that not enough? We'll attempt to answer that question for you also. What's in it for you? What's in it for you as the plan sponsor? Why is this important? What's in it for you? There's always got to be something behind that reason. And then what are your peers doing? What do we see in the industry? What's been happening? What's taken place? And how is that impacting others? And then one of the big things, and Greg and I talk about this often, how long will this process take? What's involved in this process? How long will this process take? And then also, are there any tips, maybe things that make this more efficient? Who should we include? What services should we be looking at? We'll provide all of that detail here in the time that we have for you all today. Greg, any context you want to add there before I jump right into the first slide?
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So why is this important? We all know that the ERISA, or the Employee Retirement Income Security Act of 1974, requires plan fiduciaries to ensure that fees paid out of plan assets are reasonable and in light of services being rendered. So we will start this conversation because often the question that we get is related around fees. What's the difference between the fees that we're being paid and the services that are being rendered? And Arissa would talk about plan assets, if the things are being paid out of plan assets or that are responsible by the plan participants, then they need to be reasonable in light of the services rendered. Again, there's a lot of jargon around the rules, but what we would like to make sure that you all understand is that if anything will be paid out of plan assets, that as a part of your fiduciary responsibility, they need to be reasonable, that the services being rendered, the fees need to be reasonable as it relates to the services being rendered. So really there's some guidelines or some rules that are related to why this is important, but also at the same time, being a fiduciary of your plan, we want to do what's in best interest of the participants within the plan. So making sure that we're monitoring, updating, benchmarking, maybe going out for requests for proposal on our plan is always making sure that we're doing what's in best interest of our plan participants. So again, our goal is to make sure that people can get to and through retirement. And a part of that process will be monitoring, benchmarking, and doing things like requests for proposals as it relates to fees and or services.
Hey, Brianne, I think an important starting point, though, for the discussion and a question that often comes up from fiduciary committees is, we haven't done an RFP for forever, and is it required? And the short answer is, legally it's not required that you put the plan out to bid. However, I would say, putting my lawyer hat on, that there's a lot of the litigation settlements. So not any litigation decisions. You're not seeing any formal judicial order in demanding an RFP, but you are seeing a lot of the settlements do include a requirement that the plan sponsor put the plan out to bid. So again, it's not required, but we're definitely seeing more plans do just sort of general assessment RFPs rather than waiting until there's a problem.
No, definitely. So one of to piggyback off of what Greg just mentioned, isn't benchmarking enough? Shouldn't we be able to go look at what other plans that are similar to ours, or maybe see what fees and services are being paid by plans similar to our plan? What shouldn't that be enough? Well, to Greg's point, as we talked about some of the recent litigation, maybe some of the settlements that have taken place, there's kind of three things that we may see come out of that information. So the first, and this is a service that we provide annually to all of our clients, would be the basic fee benchmarking study. This allows us to look at maybe general data related to the plan, come up with a fee range that the plan should expect to be in within a range. And then if we solicited those bids in the open market, we can say you would assume to be in a certain range during that time. And we could say, hey, maybe you're out of scope or you're within scope during that process. But what the fee benchmarking does, it really just allows us to benchmark the fees. But as we all know right now, there's been quite a bit of compression of fees in the retirement marketplace, especially for record keepers and administrative services. And when you think about the complexity of the risk involved in record keeping, we need to think about maybe some of the other areas that are involved as it relates to what can be outside of that basic fee benchmarking study. And that's where you get into maybe a higher level, which would be your request for bid. This would incorporate now some specific plan information, maybe number of participants, plan assets, plan design, maybe some things related to strategy that the plan would like to achieve. That's where you start getting to your request for bid. So at the fee benchmarking letter, we're just looking at the fees, how they're benchmarked against other plans. Now, when we're looking at a request for bid, we're not quite full at proposal, but now we're getting information that's related specifically to our plan, participant, asset levels, et cetera. And then lastly, that most comprehensive, which we'll spend a good amount of time on today, will be the most comprehensive, that request for proposal. That is a custom process. It is tailored to the unique circumstances of the plan sponsor, objectives, strategies, and then services needed for that particular plan. And it's really important to take a step back and looking at just why maybe the benchmarking isn't enough, because there are a lot of details that happen in that record keeping environment that we like to take a broader look at. For example, proprietary investment management. So you may have your fee benchmarking study that you can benchmark the fees, but are you looking at, are there any proprietary investments that allow the fee to move, or maybe have us in a position where we have to keep these certain funds with a certain record keeper? Are there managed accounts? Are there proprietary IRA rollovers, areas where maybe the provider can gather additional revenue on top of what's happening in that record keeping process? And then again, we always try to look at what are the touch points that happen with our participants? Is there cross-selling? Are there outside retail opportunities that may take place as well? And when you go through your full request for proposal, it allows you to take a full look at each of those opportunities, and then at the same time, come up with a custom approach for the plan that you're looking at outside of just that basic fee benchmarking study. So Greg, anything there before I jump into the next question that I've got for you as it relates to what's in it for the plan participant?
No, I think you covered it. I think that's
okay. So what's in it for the plan participant, Greg? What have you seen on your side, specifically now that you've got both that experience on the record keeper side and here what we do with Multnomah Group?
You know, I think the starting point of what's in it for me is often, and I'll talk about this later when we talk about the specific steps of an RFP, but you know, I think the first question is, you know, when's the last time you did one, if you've done one at all, and what's the goal of completing an RFP? Because you know, I've worked with committees who've said we're perfectly happy with the services that we have, we're perfectly happy with our record keeper, but we do feel like we do need to go out to RFP periodically. I mean, you know, a lot of governmental plans are required to go out to bid. Typically, you'll see a 3 or 5 year requirement that they have to go out. And you do see a lot of private employers or 401k plans and 403b plans following a similar time frame. So, you know, even if you don't have a specific issue that you're trying to address, what you will see from an RFP is you get the best of, you're going to get the best of what everyone has to offer put in front of you. And in some cases, there may be items that your current provider offers that for whatever reason, maybe the provider wasn't clear on how they're available, or maybe you didn't have a clear understanding of what it is they're trying to put in front of you, especially as it relates to administration, that you can add to your plan. And we've definitely seen this happen before, where there are some outsourced services that can be passed over to the record keeper that the plan sponsor just wasn't aware of until they put the plan out to bid and someone really did a deep dive on what's available. So here's just some examples of some of the administrative services that sometimes you'll see a plan sponsor doing in-house that we're seeing more and more being outsourced to whoever your ultimate record keeper is.
No, definitely. And the one that I like to spend a little time on is just that conversation around payroll integration. One thing that's great about a lot of the providers that are in the record keeping space, they have done a good job of working with the number of payroll providers out there. You have several different payroll providers who do things in different ways, but in working with your record keeper partner, especially in this request for proposal, you can really nail down exactly what type of integration you would like. Is it 360? Is it 180? Do you only want it to be where you're sending a certain number of files and they're working on the back end? So that payroll integration is usually always a win for that administrative department, the offices that usually handle that detail within an organization. So Greg, maybe some thoughts around what participants may see also.
Well, anytime you're thinking about, and we typically include this when we talk about fee benchmarking, when we do our annual fee benchmarking discussion, it's not just, are you getting the lowest price? You know, we put sort of a range of what we believe the plan should be paying for record keeping, but it's a broader conversation about, is the fee you're paying within the range? And if it is, what products and services are you getting in return for that fee? And that's where we really start looking at what the participant experience is. On the previous slide, we were talking about administrative services. My experience has been that employers are willing to give up a little bit in their administrative services, maybe a little pain within the HR department if things aren't going perfect with their record keeper. But once you start having bad experiences for your participants, that's when you'll see a plan sponsor maybe saying, hey, we need to go out to bid. We probably need to change record keepers. So I generally see that employers are pretty sensitive if you're not treating the participants well. So it can be the participant services can be the reason you go out to bid. But some of these bullet points I think are interesting, because one of the other things that we're seeing from record keepers is an expansion of what I would call out of plan services. There's a couple that are on here. It mentions wellness programs, student loan services. These are things that your fiduciary committee isn't really tasked with. These aren't problems your fiduciary committee is tasked with solving. And I think there could even be an argument that as a fiduciary to the retirement plan, you shouldn't necessarily take these things into consideration in making a decision, or they shouldn't be the reason for your decision. But it is true that all things being equal, we are seeing providers provide some ancillary products and services that ultimately might benefit your participants, even though they're not traditional retirement plan services.
Yeah, no, and Greg makes a great point there that a number of these may be ancillary in nature to what the retirement plan committee may do, but they can be a differentiator as you're looking at a proposal. I mean, Greg, we've seen a number of different proposals as it relates to student loan services. I think if any of us have seen the media or heard the conversation around just what's happening with student loans in general, oftentimes that may be hey, this is an additional service that may be available for your participants that could be an added benefit. But what we would say is it shouldn't be the decision-making factor. It needs to be a part of that full process as you're looking at the full request for proposal. Okay, so Greg, maybe what about technology? I think that's where things can really be on the cutting edge floor, especially if you haven't went for out to bid in over a decade, for example.
Yeah, I think technology is an area where you really have an opportunity through the RFP process to maybe see some things that you otherwise don't know are out there. I was doing some notes for this, and on just thinking about, why would you go out to RFP if everything is good the way it is? I mentioned earlier, one of the reasons is you might see some new things from your current record keeper. But the other thing that I think is really beneficial, and it comes through, it's most notable, I think, in some of the technology, is what else is out there that other providers have available to me as a plan sponsor or to my participants to help us either manage the plan or help employees prepare for a secure retirement. I think when you go through the RFP process, one of the critical things that we would ask a committee to do is review the websites of all the finalists, both the administrative website and the participant website, to understand what do we have now? And you want to sort of overlay that with what are these other companies offering? Does it make it easier to run the plan? Does it help participants get to a more secure retirement faster? I think every committee that you see go through an RFP always has a few surprises where they see some things that they didn't know were out there. The other thing that you get when you go through an RFP process, you really do get an indicator, and you don't really get this as much when you do fee benchmarking. What you do get is an indicator of where the record keeping and retirement planning market is heading, because everyone shows up with the best new product or service that they've been developing, and I'll share it with you. So I think it's an opportunity to not only understand what things might not be available or what things you're not using now that might be available, but also to see what new products are being developed in the industry.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed in serving as a search consultant, kind of that liaison between a consultant within our firm and a plan going out for bid, is that even your current provider often has new products and services that they may have been launching to new plans that they are now record keeping for, that just haven't made its way downstream to current plans that they have. And oftentimes, if you don't speak up to say, hey, we may be interested in this new customer experience or this new communication process, it may not make its way down to you until the provider gets to the space where they're bringing it out to their entire book of business. But definitely during the RFP process, from what I've noticed, is that they'll bring that new information, the new process to the table during that time, of course, to be able to retain the business. So the next piece that we just wanted to talk about, and we started the conversation there, is just around fees in general. We know that a number of you have conversations around that. To Greg's point, that's one of the questions he'll get, or we haven't done this in a while. What does it mean to have competitive pricing? Greg, what are some of your thoughts there on fees and what that fee process looks like and what we should be looking for there?
So the annual fee benchmarking, it should be noted that oftentimes results in a conversation with the current provider and very regularly results in a reduction in the fees. So the fee benchmarking is definitely an effective way to have an open negotiation or conversation with your current record keeper. But I don't think there's any question that when you go out to bid, you're going to get even your current provider sharpening their pencil as much as they can, because they know that there's other bids coming in. They recognize that other organizations are interested in the business and will be putting their best, lowest price forward. The one interesting thing with an RFP, it goes not just to fees, but also to some of the additional services that Breon was mentioning. You do see situations where the current provider comes in with a whole host of brand new things and a significantly reduced fee. And sometimes a committee will look at that and say, well, wait a minute, how long has all this been available to us? And typically, when we get to a finalist presentation, we would probably ask the current record keeper to address that, to have an explanation. It might be something exactly like Breon said, which is it just rolled out, it's being offered to this group of clients, and we just haven't gotten to you yet, and that is reasonable. But it definitely gets noticed when the incumbent comes in with significant changes to what is currently being offered.
Yeah, definitely. And again, as we mentioned before, if we go back to our earlier slides, the 3 levels, you're looking at the fee benchmarking process, which of course we're going to look at some additional services, et cetera, there, maybe that request for bid. But now when we're doing the full request for proposal, as we mentioned here, you're going to get live pricing from active vendors who are actively searching for new business. So that kind of changes the landscape a bit. To Greg's point, you'll also get live pricing and live updates to services that are provided as well. So not just a fee conversation, a services conversation also. So what are our peers doing now? We do have a slide here, and there's quite a bit on the slide, but I think Greg and I will kind of break down the details for you. So Greg, maybe if you get us started, I'll jump in here there also.
Yeah, sure. I think now we're sort of moving the conversation, more to what does an RFP look like and what are the results. A lot of times there will be just the need to conduct an RFP, but more often than not, there is something that has probably triggered the desire to go out to bid. And in this case, there was a 401k plan with 2,700 employees, $350 million in assets. The incumbent provider, so the incumbent record keeper, was actually acquired. And this gave the plan sponsor the opportunity to sort of say, hey, we hired this company to work with us. Now we're working with this company. We don't necessarily have any issues with this change, but at the same time, maybe it is time that we take a look at what we're currently being offered and what else is out there in the marketplace. So the acquisition by the 2 record keepers combining was really what got the client to start thinking about, hey, maybe this is something we should look at. So they retained Multnomah Group, and the first thing that we did was a benchmarking study was completed. So what you'd see in sort of our annual fee benchmarking work. And it appeared that the fees were at least 25% higher than a similar position plan you know, with the same amount of participants and assets. Ultimately say, hey, do you want us to just negotiate directly with them, see if we can get this in line? And they said, actually, we think it's time to just complete a full RFP and review the full breadth of the relationship. Ultimately, they went through the RFP process, which we'll talk about sort of what that means, not specific to this client, but sort of in general terms. But at the completion of that process, a new vendor was selected. And these are some of the enhancements that they saw. The revenue requirement actually was something that was changed, which we're seeing pretty standard in the industry. They were on a basis point percentage fee structure. We were able to move them to a flat fee per participant structure that reduced the plan fees by approximately $700,000. The new vendor allowed full open architecture, so no requirement of any proprietary investments, which allowed us access to a broader array of investments. And also they got a new service team. The new service team included a dedicated education consultant to focus on participant education, a new participant website that they felt had a little more advanced planning tools for participants to use. And overall, the last bullet point is they did introduce, we don't do this all the time, but they did introduce a service level agreement to ensure that they continue getting the services that were promised by the winner.
Yeah, and again, to just echo, a lot of that was a part of the process of going through the full request for bid and sending it out to 10 potential vendors. You have 10 potential vendors vying for the business, so that gives you a good opportunity to really see what's out in the market there. So how long did this process take? So I'll get us started with this slide, and Greg, we can somewhat go back and forth here, but there are really 3 phases to this process. And when we say allow 6 months to complete, we're saying that's where we go from a preparation, making sure that things are organized in a way, a project timeline, a search timeline, et cetera, to analysis, which will, after you get your responses back, your information back from each one of the proposed bidders, you can then analyze the details that you receive. And then phase 3, depending upon if you determine you would like to make a change, we have conversion. So now, Greg, I may ask you to put on your different hat now. You're going back and forth from maybe some experiences you've had before and now. What does that process look like? Does it generally take 6 months for this process to go into effect?
I think the RFP process itself, if you just focus on phase 1 and phase 2, that alone can take up to 6 months. The conversion is where a conversion only happens if you make a decision to change, typically.
Correct.
I do think at the end of most RFPs, even if you retain your current record keeper, a lot of times there are some changes in the agreement, oftentimes a change in price, maybe some different products and services, but that's not nearly as substantive of a project as converting to a new record keeper. So I think really phase 1 and phase 2 can take up a full 6 months before you even start doing any project work to make a change.
Yeah, and we have an example of what this will look like and how long this will take. So maybe I'll get us started with number 1. Greg and I'll kind of go back and forth through these. But that first step, again, and we're talking about that preparation phase. We're forming a committee. We're developing and managing a schedule. At this time, we're setting some deadlines. And then also think about your current workload, HR staff, finance staff, those who may be involved in this. What does their workload look like? Are we, at the same time, are you trying to implement a new workforce management system or a new payroll system? Those are some of the considerations you may want to think about as you're embarking on this process. And as Greg mentioned, again, we're still in that preparation phase. Know that that step 1 and 2 may take up to 6 months. Greg, thoughts on the next one?
Yeah, I think, I want to go back a little bit though, thinking about the vendor search committee and developing and managing a search schedule. When you think about preparation, which was the first stage. I think there are some very important conversations that need to happen before you even go down this path. You need to understand that it is a project. If you have Multnomah Group or another outside consultant helping you through the process, to be honest, a lot of the collection of information, a lot of the review of the information is handled by Multnomah Group, as you see on this slide. And I want to sort of touch on each one of those bullets and talk about what we do to support you. But I would really ask a committee to do, it's not heavy lifting, but have some real conversations
Definitely.
before you say, yes, we're going to move forward. And some of the things that I'd like to see come out of those conversations is, first off, get committee agreement on why are we doing this RFP? Are there any problems? Are there any issues that we're trying to resolve? Are there administrative issues as an employer that we're struggling with? Or are there, I mentioned it earlier, are there participant issues that we're trying to address? Or are there no issues? And the committee might just say there aren't really any issues, but we want to see what's out there. I would say the chances of making a change if there aren't any issues probably aren't typically that large. It would take something pretty significant that another company would have to offer, only because the decision to move to a new record keeper is very, very visible to your employees, right? Everyone's going to be impacted. Everyone's going to get new accounts. You're possibly going to get a new investment lineup. So the decision to move when there aren't any current issues can be a challenging one, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. There absolutely are times where a committee goes into the RFP process with sort of the intent of sort of kicking the tires, just seeing what's out there. And after they complete the 6 months of collecting information and reviewing and finalist presentations, you'll see the committee say, boy, I didn't ever think we would change, but
Definitely.
it became obvious that that's what we should do. So I think leading into the preparation, you need to have some conversations about what are we trying to solve? If we're not trying to solve anything, are we still prepared for the outcome that there might be a change? Because even when you don't think it's going to happen, it still might happen. The other thing that I would encourage a committee to do before they start is actually write down what the goals are. And the reason I want to do that is when you get down the road 6 months later and you start inviting companies in to do finalist presentations, before you even invite the first company in, I would get out what you wrote down as the goals and just make sure everyone on the committee still agrees that those are the goals that you want to see for the completion of the process.
No, definitely. And going into the second, and of course, Greg, any additional color, developing the RFP is that next process. And to Greg's point around goals and goal setting, a lot of that detail we'll be able to capture in the scope and objectives of the search. So of course, we will have some additional detail in the preparation phase, but we'll be able to put out and outline objectives for the search, what we're looking for potential providers in the space, and then also sharing that information with what we would consider a qualified vendor, a vendor that we know would have the ability to do the work at the level that you would need the work to be done. Clear RFP questions, and maybe Greg, some additional context there on ways that firms like what we do may support that process.
Yeah, we provide, ultimately your committee drives the process, right? You approve everything, but some of the work that Multnomah Group does going into this, we do develop the questions and provide them. We do ask committee members to review all of them and make additions or deletions as they see fit. If again, there's a specific issue or concern that the committee has raised relative to their current provider, sometimes we'll add 3 or 4 additional questions to really be able to drill down on that issue. But it's all done in conjunction with the committee. The other thing that Breon touched on that I think is really important, at Multnomah Group, we do make recommendations of who to send the proposal to. We do a lot of work with all the different record keepers, and there are some that are better at some aspects of record keeping than others. And to the extent that the committee is really dialing in on a certain aspect of the service that's being provided, that can change who we would recommend as probably sending the RFP to.
Yeah. So then the next phase is where some of that background work is done. You're soliciting proposals, the requests for proposals from candidates. And then at that point is where, to Greg's earlier point of there will be some commitment, is we're going to review responses with the search committee, reviewing those details and summary reports, details that may be pertinent to specific objectives that the organization is looking for, because this is the time where you really want to narrow down before we go on to step 4. And Greg, I'll pause for a moment for you. But before we go into step 4 of who we want to invite as finalists, if any, who we would like to talk to, what information that we see that makes us think that they may be a good fit for the organization. So Greg, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I think, really steps 2, 3, and 4, the committee is involved, certainly. But I do, after being at Multnomah Group for a few years, there's a lot of heavy lifting that we do as a consultant to help you through that. Perhaps most important is, collecting all the proposals. And, sometimes you might send out written RFPs to as many as 6 companies. Typically, what you'll see is following the review, you won't invite all 6 in for finalist presentations. You'll identify some differences and probably invite maybe 3 in for finalist presentations. But between the time that the RFPs are received and the time you get to finalist presentations, Multnomah Group does a full analysis of all 6 responses in this example. And what we really try and do is identify the substantive differences within all the responses. And then on a separate document, we will call those out for your committee to see and review. We will also highlight areas of specific interest that the committee has asked to be focused on and provide recommendations of who we think would be the best fit going forward. So again, the committee is involved along the way, but there is quite a bit of heavy lifting done to consolidate the information to make sure that the substantive differences between the providers is articulated very clearly to your committee.
And after all that, we can select a vendor. So you get to the point where you've had an opportunity to solicit proposals, review that information, again, with support, and then also getting vendor references, negotiating, made some preliminary fees, et cetera. And then at that point, to Greg's point, as he mentioned before, under committee direction, we will interview the finalists and select and choose a winner, so to speak, for the plan. Now, oftentimes that'll be you stay with your current incumbent provider. So there may be a new contract, but it's not a new contract going to a new provider. And to Greg's earlier point, making the decision to go to a new provider impacts everyone in the organization. It impacts everyone in the organization. But the changes that you may receive from the incumbent provider, they're going to impact everyone in the organization as well, but not going to a new contract, et cetera. So there's not necessarily any winners or losers. You just need to understand that if you do go to a new provider, that does impact everyone within the organization in a heavier way than it does as it relates to staying with the current provider.
Yeah, now that we're at the end of sort of that 6-month process, if you think back to the beginning, some of those considerations, there's work involved during this first 6 months. But if you do decide to change vendors, honestly, that's when the heavy lifting for the employer or plan sponsor starts. So the other consideration before you even start the process, and Breon was alluding to it earlier, if you do decide to make a change, who is going to be involved? You need to touch base with everyone that's going to be involved, including IT, who helps provide the data to the record keeper, your human resources department, potentially your marketing department. You probably need to check with all of them and say, hey, what's your calendar look like 6 months from now in case we undergo this substantive change? I think it's also really important to think about what's happening just culturally with your employees. I can tell you without doubt that when the pandemic hit, there were organizations that I thought were going to go out to bid, who were potentially going to make substantive changes to their plans, who said, we're not doing anything right now. We don't want to touch anything. Our employees are on edge. It's just not the right time to consider substantive changes. So you really want to look at the environment and what's happening at your organization, and think about 6 months from now, if we take on this project, how is that going to be received by the employees? Are there a bunch of other things that are going on that make it the wrong time? And I have no issues with any committee that has a deep discussion about an RFP and decides this is not the right time to do it. We'll talk about it again a year from now. If that's what's right for your organization, then that's what you should do.
Yeah. Now, before we open it up to some Q&A, we did want to make sure we gave you all some like actionable tips that you can use, or some processes that we've seen that may support a successful search process. So just to Greg's point that he had just mentioned before, as a part of that early stage, involve your internal partners. This includes really the people who touch the plan. You've got payroll, finance, HR, benefits, maybe legal needs to be involved. You need to have those conversations early on in the process, because again, to Greg's point, the last thing, 6 months down the road, you decide to make a change you haven't discussed with a payroll department or a benefits department. So making sure that those internal partners, if they're not already on the retirement plan committee, it may be some subcommittee that can support the work that's happening in the search process. So they are kept abreast of what's happening that may impact payroll, may impact benefits, may impact the plan document, et cetera. Any thoughts there, Greg, before we go into the next bullet?
Nope, I think you covered it.
Yeah, next one would be overlooking fund liquidity restrictions. And this is one where having partners like Multnomah Group is a area that we can support you in quite a bit. Oftentimes you may determine, hey, yeah, I really want to make this change, but not realize that the investments in the underlying investment menu may not be able to make the change at the pace that you would like. The funds may have what's called a 1-year put, that they need to stay in the organization before they're able to move. We do know a few organizations that have funds that take much longer before you're able to draw down those assets or move those assets. So being aware of what's happening in the underlying investment menu will help you make those decisions, and working with partners that can support you in that move also. Any additional context you want to add there, Greg?
No, only that's very critical to be very transparent to the other bidding companies what they will get if they're successful. These are partnerships, and it's, you want the winning bidder to understand what it is they're getting in order to allow them to put together the most competitive bid that they can. And this is something that we definitely would help you with as far as determining what is available for transfer and what isn't.
Yeah, definitely. And then the next two are kind of together. Not assuming that services are included in the vendor's offering is key. When you're going through this process, we get great marketing documents from the potential bidders. A lot of information that they share, and sometimes that information may not actually pertain to what they're offering for the current plan. So making sure that you're asking those detailed questions. Well, is this included? Do we have this as a part of our program? Just nailing down exactly what you see in their proposals to make sure that it's included in the offer. And then if you determine that you would like to make change, as Greg mentioned before, this is a partnership, ensuring prompt notification, not lagging that detail. Again, those are areas that we support you all with, but that cooperation, having a partnership with the provider and the plan sponsor is really key, because that's what makes for successful retirement outcomes for your participants. And then lastly, an effective communication campaign. Thoughts on that, Greg? Because I know you've been on the other side of it as well. What does that communication look like for participants, especially if a change is going to be made?
Yeah, this is really a critical point when you are going to make a change, that I think the first communication really needs to come from the employer and specifically the committee. And it's very helpful. I mean, we always have the challenge of people don't read stuff that gets sent to them. But at the same time, it's really important to make available the explanation of what decision was being made and why it was made to come from the employer before any communication comes from either the prior or the new record keeper. Sometimes you have to be pretty quick to get that communication out because the two other record keepers, the former and the new, both want to communicate things to your participants as well. So you need to sort of control that within the process. But as far as the other one, I want to go back to the fourth one and talk a little more about ensuring prompt notification to the prior vendor. One of the things that I worked with Multnomah Group when I was at the Record Keeper quite extensively. One thing I always appreciated about Multnomah's approach, and we're not the only firm that does it, but I think it's good the way that we approach it. We really don't look to surprise anyone. We don't look for gotchas. If a plan sponsor approaches us and says, we've had it, we're fed up with our current record keeper, we want you to go out to bid. Typically, one of the first things we will do is talk to the current record keeper and try and determine if there's a resolution to whatever pain is being caused by that record keeper, because change is difficult for everyone. Ultimately, if it's determined that a change likely will be made, we will still go out to bid. But I don't like sending out RFPs unannounced to the current provider when it's a complete surprise. I'd rather have them know that there are issues and give them an opportunity to try and address them. Now, sometimes they can't, and a move is required, but at least you're on the same page going into the RFP.
Definitely. So we wanted to open it now for any questions that you all may have. So again, all of this material will be shared. We are recording the presentation, but we did want to take some time to see if anyone had any questions. Of course, feel free to use the Q&A functionality or the chat. And we'll pause just for a moment here and thank you all for joining us on the webinar. And we'll take a moment to see if there's any questions. And if not, you will have this information at your review here in the next couple of days. Okay, seeing no open questions. Greg, any final words that you would like to share before we head out?
I think that covered it. We're certainly here to help you if you do decide to go down this path. And as I said, it's the first two stages. We help you through that quite extensively. The decision to make a change, we continue to stay involved as that change happens. But that is definitely when you as an employer tend to roll up your sleeves and do a little more of the heavy lifting to make that change happen.
And again, thank you all so much. If you have any questions or a follow-up, feel free to reach back out to us. You should get this information in your email that you registered with here in a few days. So thank you all again for joining us on the webinar today.